On the Majority Report on the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome back to the program the editor of the Justice Editor for ThinkProgress.org, Ian Millhiser. Ian, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much.
All right, let's start with the gerrymandering cases that are heading to the Supreme Court, because there is a fairly significant backstory to these gerrymandering cases and the gerrymandering cases that have been in front of the Supreme Court. And there's a fairly troubling, what do you call it, future story that could be happening here. Tell us, just give us a little bit sense of the history of gerrymandering cases that have gone to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, this is going to end really badly. So the relevant history here probably begins with 2004. In a case called V Jubilare, Justice Scalia wrote an opinion on behalf of 4 members of the court saying that not only are we not going to strike down the gerrymander that's being challenged in this case, but our view, the view of these 4 justices, is that partisan gerrymandering is just not a matter for federal courts at all. Federal courts can never consider a partisan gerrymandering case. Justice Kennedy gave people a little bit of hope in that case, though, because he wrote a separate opinion where he said, I'm not going to strike down this gerrymander, but in a future case, you might be able to convince me there's a standard I could use to sort out which gerrymanders are not allowed. And so that was the hope that people brought into the last Supreme Court term, where they thought there's this terrible Wisconsin gerrymander, there's this very aggressive Democratic gerrymander in Maryland. Surely we can get Justice Kennedy to say that these crossed the line, and people had some really, promising legal theories. Well, Justice Kennedy decided to punt the issue, and and then a few days later he left the court. And
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, the hopes for Kennedy were that he had specifically asked to social scientists, I guess broadly speaking, come up with a way in which we can measure when something has been overly gerrymandered. And in fact, social scientists did that with a concept of wasted votes, right?
That's right. Yeah. So Kennedy had said, look, it's hard to determine which maps are partisan gerrymanders and which ones aren't. I need something objective, something clear cut that lets me sort bad maps from good maps. And there were a bunch of theories that people came up with. They were basically just mathematical formulas where you could take the records from the last election, plug it into this formula, and that would tell you if this map was likely to be a gerrymander or not. And so people were really, really hopeful. I remember attending the oral argument in the Wisconsin case and thinking, oh, yeah, we've got 5 votes. Like, they're going to strike this map down. Things are going to get better soon. And that is just not what happened. Kennedy decided not to decide the case, and then he decided to give the middle finger to everyone that was hoping that he would stick around and retain some semblance of the rule of law in this country. And Trump replaced him with Brett Kavanaugh, who, of course, threatened Senate Democrats at his confirmation hearing, said that what goes around comes around, because Democrats dared to probe allegations that Kavanaugh tried to rape someone.
And we should say, in terms of Wisconsin, the theories, I guess the algorithms that would determine wasted votes, seem to be borne out when you look at the results of the last election, where Democrats won, 54% of the vote, and Republicans took 63% of the seats in the state house?
That's right.
That's nuts.
Yeah, so
that's just like I want everybody just to sort of like marinate in that. We
right.
This is not the Senate being appointed by landowners. This is not the Senate set up as a way of not being particularly democratic in terms of the number of people representing. This is on a fairly localized level where you have a 54% to 46% split. That's like what we would call a landslide, right?
Wisconsin, for all intents and purposes, is no longer a Democratic state. I mean, they have a democratically elected governor who, as of, I think, yesterday, is a Democrat. But their legislature, it is impossible. I mean, absent I mean, maybe if Democrats managed to get 60 or 70% of the vote, it would happen. But that's not happening in Wisconsin. It is impossible for Democrats to win the state assembly when you have a map where you can get 54% of the vote and the other party still gets 63% of the seats. So that's how aggressive this gerrymander is, that Justice Kennedy looked at and said, instead of doing something about this, I'm just going to leave it to Brett Kavanaugh. So that's the position we're in right now. And what I think is likely to happen now that these cases are back, this time it's a North Carolina gerrymander, which is almost as aggressive as the Wisconsin one, plus the Maryland case again. And what's likely to happen is I think you've got 5 votes right now to just say, you know what? Gerrymandering is not the business of the federal courts. Federal courts will never do anything about gerrymandering. And if you're an entrenched political party that wants to ensure that you never lose control of your state legislature again, go to town.
That's a pretty convenient timing for a Republican Supreme Court to be making that proclamation. And we should say there's a case in Maryland, right, that is being brought against Democrats as a way of basically trying to just get the gerrymandering under some measure of control.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the Maryland case, it's one of the few states. So part of the history here is that Republicans had a great electoral year in 2010. And a big problem with our system is that new maps must be drawn every 10 years, every time there's a new census. And so if you happen to win, if your party happens to win the year that ends in 0, that means you don't just get control for 2 years or until the next election. It means you also get to draw the state legislative and the congressional maps. And so since Republicans swept through basically all the swing states in 2010, they were then able to draw these maps that entrenched their power. And now, going into the 2020 census and then going into the next the next round of redistricting, in states where Republicans still control the legislature and can't be dislodged, in some states maybe Democrats will be able to capture the governor's mansion, and so they'll be able to at least veto the worst gerrymanders. But Republicans have a huge advantage in these states because they're guaranteed to control the legislature. And there's even some states in North Carolina, I believe, the governor doesn't have the power to veto a redistricting map.
And that was
Republicans based.
And that was, we should say, that was from a lame duck session in North Carolina, like the one that was done in Wisconsin. Although Evers doesn't seem to be he's basically saying like you can sue me in terms of abiding by those laws. But if I remember correctly, the reason why the Democratic governor in North Carolina can't veto it is because of laws that were passed in the lame duck, basically stripping him or her in the future of their ability to do that. Well, Ian,
yeah, I'm not sure about the origins there, but the point is that they have managed not just to entrench their rule for 10 years, but potentially manage to entrench their rule permanently, because the only way to dislodge Republicans from their control of the state legislature is to win is for Democrats to win a state legislative race that cannot be won because Republicans drew the maps.
Now, there seems to me to be a very sensible and rational way to deal with this. If the state, the citizens of the state vote to create like an independent commission. These things are never perfect,
right,
but at least an independent commission would have some semblance of neutrality to some extent, right? So that seems like the most rational decision that can be made, but ...
Yeah, right. So a lot of states, Arizona has one, California has one, quite a few states, I think, Michigan and Wisconsin just passed ballot initiatives whose purpose is to make it harder to gerrymander, or at least Michigan did. But the problem is that A few years ago, there was a case challenging the Arizona Redistricting Commission. And the good news is that the Supreme Court voted 5-4 to say, yes, you can have this redistricting commission. The bad news is that the fifth vote was, guess who? Anthony Kennedy. And Anthony Kennedy's been replaced by Brett Kavanaugh, who said that he's going to take revenge on Democrats. So there is a very high likelihood that these independent commissions are going to come before the Supreme Court again, that there will now be 5 votes to strike them down, and that means that the Supreme Court will make gerrymandering even worse than it already is.
What is the possible justification for striking down these independent commissions?
Sure. So the Constitution says that as a general rule, legislative maps shall be drawn by the state legislatures. I think it says by the legislator thereof, which thereof referring back to the state. And so the argument is that the word legislature in that context means the elected body of lawmakers who typically make laws. The problem with that argument is that there's at least a century of precedent saying that in this context, that's not what the word legislature means. So the word legislature means any body in a state that is empowered to make laws. So that can be, for example, a ballot initiative. But what the dissenters argued in the Arizona case is that they argued that only the state legislature and not a ballot initiative is permitted to rein in gerrymandering.
But isn't there, I mean, and I guess maybe you've just answered that by saying that there's a century of precedent, but we see this all the time where the legislature can farm out their authority, right? And either affirmatively or by the nature of the I guess the constitution of the state.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I mean, under the theory of the dissenters, things could get really, really troubling. I mean, if you take their argument seriously, does that mean that a governor cannot veto a redistricting bill because the governor is not the legislature, he is the executive, and therefore in states like, say, Wisconsin, where Democrats are counting on the Democratic governor to veto the next Republican gerrymander, that the governor can't do that? Does that mean that in states like Pennsylvania, where the state Supreme Court struck down the gerrymander, that, well, the judiciary is the judiciary, not the legislature. So maybe the judiciary isn't allowed to weigh in. And so this could take us to a world, if the dissenting view in the Arizona case ultimately prevails, where the only people who are allowed to draw maps are legislatures, which are controlled by Republicans because Republicans entrenched themselves in the 2010 election. And as it turns out, the 2010 election is the only election that will ever matter again, because, once you gain control of the state legislature, it's impossible to dislodge the party that controls it.
Is there any way that, now these cases in North Carolina and Maryland don't necessarily implicate a referendum for creating an independent commission? Is there any way that the court, I mean, I know there's probably a way, but what's the likelihood of the court saying, hey, and incidentally, even though this is not at issue in this case, since we're here, we might as well also say independent commissions, not kosher?
I mean, I don't think that they'd strike down independent commissions in either the North Carolina or in the Maryland case, because neither one of those states has an independent coalition or independent commission. But all it takes, I mean, Arizona could do it again. All it takes is for Republicans to file the exact same lawsuit they filed in Arizona a few years ago. They can even dust off the same brief that they filed and just refile them. And, now it goes up to the Supreme Court again, and the Supreme Court says, there were 4 of us last time, but there's 5 of us now, you lose.
That would seem like a, pretty nakedly partisan ruling, wouldn't it? But do you think they care?
I mean, maybe they care. I mean, that's the, that is the question on which the rule of law in this country hinges, is, and not specifically if they care, but if Chief Justice John Roberts cares. I mean, there are, the angel and the devil sitting on Roberts's shoulder is he has a devil that says, oh, you just want conservatives to win everything, you should do that. And he has an angel who says, if you push too hard, then the Supreme Court's going to be delegitimized. People are going to stop listening to your decisions, and that's going to undermine your ability to enact conservative policies in the long run. And the question is whether he listens to the angel or he listens to the devil. And I mean, no one but John Roberts knows who he's going to listen to in any given case.
I like how John Roberts' angel is just a sort of pragmatically evil devil. I mean, he's just a little bit.
No. Like there's nothing good.
There's the devil, and then there's just the more pragmatic devil that sits on his shoulders.
Yeah, I mean, there's the lawful evil John Roberts, and there's the chaotic evil John Roberts, and you never know which one's going to prevail.
All right, so with that said, we will keep an eye on that. We are probably at least a year away, I guess, from the potential of the independent commissions being struck down. And because of the nature of, like, if you can get a democratically elected governor, you can get a referendum like we've seen in Michigan to have an independent commission, which could be, the sort of the last saving grace. So I guess we're a year away from finding out whether, at the very least, a year away, or is it possible they could take another case this late?
I mean, they could potentially take a case, but I don't think that there's one. I don't think there's one in the works.
Okay.
I mean, the saving grace is that someone has to file the case. It has to go to the district court. The district court has to say, hey, this is the exact same case that the Supreme Court decided 3 years ago. Go away, and then that goes up to the Supreme Court. So that will take time. There is, however, plenty of time for the Supreme Court to decide something like that before the 2020 redistricting cycle.
Great.